April 9, 1917, Vimy Ridge, France. The British had tried to take it, failed. The French had tried to take it, failed twice, with losses so catastrophic that entire divisions ceased to exist as functioning units. For 2 years, Vimy Ridge had sat above the Douai plain like a fortified fact, a natural escarpment held by the German army with the cold confidence of men who knew that anyone coming uphill across open ground in the face of prepared machine gun positions was conducting an exercise in organized dying. 9 divisions of the Allied armies had broken against this ridge. The ground in front of it was so saturated with the dead that burial parties had stopped trying to recover them all. Vimy had become a word that meant impossible. Then the Canadian Corps was given the assignment. What happened next on that ridge on the morning of April 9th is taught in Canadian schools as a moment of national identity, the birth of Canada as a nation, some historians have argued, forged in the mud and blood of a French hillside. That narrative is real, but it obscures something more interesting, something more precise, something that the German defenders of Vimy Ridge never saw coming because no army in the war had ever done it before. The Canadians did not attack Vimy Ridge the way every army before them had attacked it. They did not line up, blow a whistle, and walk into the machine guns. They did not rely on the artillery to destroy what needed destroying and then send the infantry forward to occupy what remained. They did not trust the plan made by officers who would watch from the rear. They did something that the British High Command considered almost dangerously radical. They told every man in every trench exactly what the plan was. Every private, every corporal, every stretcher bearer. Every soldier in the Canadian Corps was briefed on the complete operational picture, the objectives, the artillery schedule, the contingency plans, the exact location of every German position they were expected to encounter. This sounds obvious. In 1917, it was a revolution. The standard British doctrine of the First World War did not share operational information below the officer level. The men who went over the top knew their immediate objective and nothing else. If the officer leading them was killed in the first 30 seconds, which happened with a frequency that British casualty records document with grim regularity, the unit stopped. It had no information, it had no authority to improvise. It stood in the open and waited for orders that would not come, and the machine guns finished the rest. Canadian Corps Commander Arthur Currie looked at this doctrine and concluded that it was not a military strategy. It was a mechanism for producing casualties without producing results. He rejected it. What Currie built in the weeks before Vimy was something that no army on the Western Front had attempted at scale. A complete replica of the German defensive system constructed behind Canadian lines from aerial photographs and intelligence reports over which every attacking unit rehearsed its specific assignment until the movements were automatic, not practiced, automatic. The difference matters. A practiced movement requires conscious recall under stress. An automatic movement happens when conscious thought has been replaced by muscle memory, when the body knows what to do even when the mind is occupied with staying alive. The German defensive positions on Vimy Ridge were among the most sophisticated in the entire Western Front. 3 lines of trenches, connected by tunnels, concrete machine gun emplacements designed to survive artillery bombardment. Deep dugouts where reserves waited to rush forward the moment an attack developed. A system built over 2 years by engineers who had studied every Allied assault on the Western Front and incorporated every lesson those assaults had provided. The Canadians had studied it just as carefully, and they had identified something that the German defensive design had not accounted for: speed. Every previous assault on Vimy had given the German defenders time to bring up reserves from the deep dugouts, time to man the second and third trench lines before the attacking infantry could reach them, time to organize a counterattack before the attackers could consolidate. The German system was designed to absorb the first wave, allow it to exhaust itself, and then destroy it before it could be reinforced. Currie's solution was to deny the Germans time. The artillery plan he developed with his staff, a rolling barrage that moved forward at exactly the pace of the infantry advance, a curtain of exploding steel that the Canadian soldiers followed at a distance of 30 meters, was designed not to destroy the German positions, but to suppress them, to keep German heads down not for minutes but for the precise seconds required for Canadian soldiers to cross the open ground between the trenches. 30 meters behind an artillery barrage in 1917 was considered suicidal by conventional military thinking. Shell fragments do not respect the theoretical safety margins written in manuals. But Currie had calculated that the danger from following the barrage too closely was lower than the danger from giving the German machine gunners time to man their positions. He presented his men with a choice between two kinds of risk and chose the one that gave them a better chance of reaching their objective alive. The men trusted him. This is documented not in official reports, but in the letters they wrote home in the week before the attack. Letters that historians have returned to repeatedly because of what they reveal about the mood inside the Canadian Corps in early April 1917. The men knew the plan. They knew their role in it. They knew what every unit on their left and right was supposed to do. And the letters describe something that is almost entirely absent from the pre-battle correspondence of British units during the same period. Confidence. Not bravado, not resignation. Not the brittle cheerfulness of men who believe they are going to die and have decided to face it with dignity. Actual confidence, grounded in the specific knowledge that the plan they were going to execute had been built on real intelligence, rehearsed until it was automatic, and entrusted to men who had been told enough to make decisions when the plan met reality and changed shape. At 5:30 in the morning on April 9, 1917, the barrage opened. 4 Canadian divisions advanced simultaneously across the entire 4-kilometer front of Vimy Ridge. The ground was frozen. A last cold snap had turned the mud of the preceding weeks into something approaching solid footing, which the Canadians regarded as luck and the German defenders regarded as irrelevant, because no one had taken this ridge and no one was going to take it today. By midday, 3 of the 4 Canadian divisions had reached their final objectives. By the end of April 9th, the Canadians held the ridge. The operation that had defeated 9 Allied divisions over 2 years was completed in a single day. The German defenders, veterans, well-supplied, behind prepared positions, had been outmaneuvered not by superior numbers or superior firepower, but by a system that gave every soldier enough information to think and enough training to act without waiting for permission. The German after-action assessments of the Vimy assault are among the most analytically honest documents produced by either side in the First World War. German commanders do not attribute the loss to bad luck or poor positioning or inadequate reserves. They attribute it to a fundamental difference in how the Canadian Corps operated compared to every other Allied force they had faced. The assessments note that Canadian units continued advancing and achieving their objectives even when officers were killed. They note that Canadian soldiers made tactical decisions at the section level, 8 to 10 men, that in the German and British systems would have required orders from 2 levels above. They note that the coordination between the barrage and the infantry was more precise than anything German defensive planning had modeled as possible. What the German assessments are describing, without using the term, is decentralized command. The doctrine that would define the most effective military organizations of the 20th century, applied at Vimy Ridge in April 1917 by a Canadian Corps commander who had concluded that trusting his men with information was not a risk, it was a force multiplier. Currie paid a price for his methods. British High Command regarded his insistence on rehearsal, his refusal to attack before he considered his corps ready, and his willingness to argue with generals who outranked him as insubordination dressed in colonial clothing. He was never given the independent command his operational record merited. After the war, he was subjected to a libel lawsuit by a Canadian newspaper that accused him, falsely, of ordering unnecessary casualties at the end of the war to win personal glory. He won the lawsuit, but the damage was permanent. He died in 1933, worn down by years of defending a reputation that the record shows needed no defense. The ridge he took is still there. The craters are still visible from the air. The preserved trenches draw visitors who walk the ground and try to understand what it felt like to be told, clearly and completely, that the plan was sound and the training was done and all that remained was to follow the barrage and trust the man on your left and the man on your right. The German commanders who wrote the after-action reports understood what had happened at Vimy better than most of the Allied generals who claimed the credit for it. They understood that they had not been defeated by courage or by numbers or by luck. They had been defeated by a system that treated soldiers as thinking men rather than expendable parts. That is the lesson of Vimy Ridge, not the glory, the system. And the system started with one decision: tell them everything.